So grateful, Suzanne, you mentioned Catherine Hayhoe on The Current this morning. I heard the same piece. I'm a longtime fan of Catherine Hayhoe, an amazing woman. Canadian, grew up in the conservative church, a very frequent visitor on 100 Huntley Street, but she speaks to all areas and dispositions of church understanding and membership. She's married to a husband who is a Baptist pastor, and they live in West Texas, where she teaches at West Texas State. And she talks to, in particular, Texan men who want nothing to do with climate change and nothing to do with adapting from a fossil fuel-based life. She shares with them the urgency of the current situation and invites them into these important conversations. It's not unlike the work of the Primates Fund or the Canadian Food Grains Bank. I think of when our kids were younger, as they went through their infant years and then their high school years, and they went on to university and other exploits in other places in Canada and the world. And our role as a parent changed from being a parent and a provider to that of a mentor. And they enjoyed influences of other peoples and groups, for indeed it takes a whole village to raise a child. And I would say in the work of the Primates Fund and the Canadian Food Grains Bank, it takes groups, it takes partnerships to create positive influences everywhere in the world. We all want to create circumstances where true sharing can flourish. And in the gospel story, we see how Jesus' wisdom and his leadership influenced what we commonly call a miracle. And we don't need to get stuck in the discussion about how it happened, but we just rejoice in the fact that people who were hungry and had been hungry for several days found themselves fully satisfied. I only learned about the Canadian Food Grains Bank a few years ago. I knew about the Primates Fund really from my time as a boy choruser in Victoria in the late 1960s. Canadian Food Grains Bank is a partnership of 15 Canadian churches and church-based agencies, including the Primates Fund. They work with locally based organizations in developing countries to meet both emergency needs but also to achieve long-term solutions to hunger and to work to foster informed action by Canadians. Their work is in part advocacy, their work is in part relief, their work is generous as it is influenced by the generosity of God in Jesus. And Jesus, well, his disciples said to him, or he called his disciples to him, and he said, I have compassion for these people. They are already and have been with me for 3 days and have nothing to eat. I do not want to send them away hungry, or they may collapse on the way. Now, language is important. We're dealing with scriptures in translation across time and across cultures and across geography. Sometimes even one word differently interpreted can shift emphasis. In one version, knowing that people have come from far away and are hungry, Mark says, if I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way. Matthew, quoting the same event, the feeding of the 4,000, says, I do not want to send them away hungry. And if you turn to the old Revised Standard Version, the precursor to the new Revised Standard Version, the language says, I am unwilling to send them away hungry. To me, there is a defiance in Matthew, which is less strident or evident in Mark. The relationship between leader, that is Jesus, and follower, that is the disciples and others who were there with them, hearing those words, especially noting the inclusion in Matthew of women, is evolving as the gospel unfolds. And there is a commitment from Jesus to his followers expressed in a shared meal to which all are invited and who must be fed regardless of circumstance. Speaking of circumstance and going back to Katharine Hayhoe and that wonderful interview, and if you didn't hear it, I do recommend you going online and seeking it out. It was a tremendous Christian witness and an explanation, which some find hard to appreciate, between the invitation of the gospel and the urgent seriousness of climate change. Hayhoe would argue they belong together, and I would likewise advocate. There is a direct connection between hunger, food production, and the climate crisis. Go back just a few years to the earlier days of the Syrian conflict, the rise of particularly notorious leaders and, of course, ISIS. And then think about the region which is called the Sahel, which is not quite a desert. It's kind of in between a desert and a lush environment. It's the area proximate to Syria. It's an area to the north of the Sahara Desert, and I got this right. It's a semi-arid region of Africa separating the Sahara Desert to the north and the tropical savannas of the south. It's increasingly drought-ridden. It has less available moisture year over year. It has experienced increased heat, decreased crop yields, more climate refugees moving from place to place, in particular into the cities of Syria, such as Aleppo, where work, housing, and medical care became less available. Conflict ensued. Young men were radicalized, possibly some women, but we know about the men most. And with no options for improvement of life, some went north, traveled across the Mediterranean to Europe, and others who were unable to make the journey, frankly, died. I think that story explains very clearly the relationship between physical environment, social disruption, and the desperate need for justice. Now, the Canadian Food Grains Bank and the Primates World Relief and Development Fund have shared in many situations which sought to create circumstances for just distribution of food and for the establishment of safe and secure communities. For instance, two examples. In 2017, famine was declared in South Sudan. The Canadian Food Grains Bank, with money from PWRDF and other partners, helped ADRA, that is the Anglican diocese there in South Sudan, feed 10,000 people. In this relatively new independent African country, civil and religious strife, a constant flow of refugees, coupled with the impacts of climate change, have challenged the very existence of the church. Despite these constant adversities, there is hope as communities are fed and are helped to move forward, hopefully, and sustainability. That said, the road, however, forward is long and the struggle continues. Second example is from Uganda. And there are many stories told of an amazing church-related ministry called the St. Jude Center for Biofertilizer Research. This organization supports the sharing of knowledge to support food security and accessibilities. I remember being in 2002 in Johannesburg for a major United Nations conference and going into one of the side rooms where displays of organizations were set up. And on the wall was a massive sign saying GMO, genetically modified organisms, are the solution for Africa. Well, it's not true. Many chemical GMO solutions for crop fertilization are proposed, even forced on farmers by multinational corporations who seek to profit from chemically dependent solutions on small farmers. This is unjust. It is unsustainable biologically. It is a foolish endeavor. St. Jude's tries to push back against that, teaching about natural biological solutions, which once established are sustainable year over year. So, to finish up, in such stories, food is shared. Justice is accomplished as God touches the earth through the Canadian Food Grains Bank and the Primates World Relief and Development Fund with beauty. Thanks for your invitation to share this morning, and thanks be to our generous Creator. Amen.